You're a pathetic failure. A real man would please me." My wife sneered as she left me for my brother. They ridiculed me, called me a clown, and kissed in front of me as I signed the divorce papers. I just smirked. But after what I did, 2 weeks later she was on my doorstep, abandoned, broke, and pleading like a beggar. My name is Eric, and I'm 36 years old. My life was once filled with the laughter of my wife, Laura, and the occasional visit from my brother, Mark. We lived in a modest home in the suburbs, where the days were predictable and the nights were filled with the comfort of routine. Laura was a vibrant woman with a laugh that could light up a room, and Mark, well, he was always the charmer, the one who could talk his way out of any trouble. But all that changed when the laughter turned to sneers and the comfort of routine was shattered by betrayal. It was a typical Thursday evening when Laura announced she was leaving me. Her words cut deep. "A real man would please me," she said, her voice dripping with disdain. Mark stood beside her, a smirk on his face, as if he had won some sort of prize. As I signed the divorce papers, they kissed, their laughter echoing, in the empty house. I just smirked, knowing that life has a way of balancing the scales. The betrayal stung, not just because of the loss of love, but because it was Mark, my own flesh and blood, who had crossed the line. The image of them together, their bodies intertwined in what should have been our marital bed, was a sight that haunted me. It wasn't just the physical act. It was the betrayal, the deceit, the utter disregard for the bond we shared. I remember the silence that followed their departure, the house feeling colder, emptier. But in that silence, a plan began to form. I wasn't going to let this go. No, I was going to make sure they understood the gravity of their actions. The days following, the divorce were a blur of pain and solitude. I moved into a small apartment, the walls echoing with the silence of my new reality. My job at the local tech firm kept me busy, but my heart wasn't in it. I spent nights staring at the ceiling, replaying Laura's words, her laughter, and Mark's smug face. The silence in my new apartment was deafening, a stark contrast to the life I once knew. Every corner of the place seemed to whisper reminders of what I had lost. My work, once a source of pride, now felt like a mundane routine, a series of tasks to distract me from the void Laura and Mark had left behind. One evening, while drowning my sorrows at a local bar, I met an old friend, Tom. He was a financial advisor with a knack for investments. Over beers, he shared stories of his latest venture, a risky but potentially lucrative investment in a startup. His eyes lit up as he described the potential, the innovation, the thrill of the gamble. Tom's enthusiasm was infectious, and for the first time in weeks, I felt a flicker of interest, a spark of something other than despair. He talked about the startup's cutting-edge technology, the young dynamic team behind it, and the promise of significant returns. As we talked, I found myself envisioning a different future, one where I wasn't just the man left behind, but someone who could rise above the betrayal. The idea of investing, of taking a risk, seemed like a way to reclaim some control over my life. It wasn't just about the money. It was about proving to myself, to Laura, to Mark, that I was more than with Tom's guidance. I invested every penny I had into the startup. It was a gamble, but one that paid off spectacularly. Within months, the startup was acquired by a tech giant, and my investment multiplied tenfold. Suddenly, I was wealthy. But wealth wasn't my revenge. It was the means to an end. I bought back our old house, the one Laura and Mark thought they'd share. I poured money into renovations, turning it into a showcase of success. The house now stood as a testament to what I had achieved, a stark contrast to the modest home we once shared. I made sure every detail was perfect, from the gleaming hardwood floors to the state-of-the-art kitchen, where I imagined Laura once dreamt of cooking gourmet meals for Mark. Meanwhile, I kept tabs on Laura and Mark through mutual friends. Their relationship, built on deceit, began to crumble. Mark's charm couldn't cover his financial irresponsibility, and Laura's dreams of luxury were fading fast. I heard whispers of their fights, the late-night arguments over money, the lavish lifestyle Mark promised but couldn't deliver. Then, the twist. I anonymously tipped off the IRS about Mark's shady dealings. The investigation that followed was swift and merciless. Mark, who had always danced on the edge of legality, found himself entangled in a web of financial scrutiny. His assets were frozen, his business ventures collapsed, and his once charming demeanor turned desperate. Laura, who had left me for a real man, was now left with nothing. The luxury she craved had evaporated, leaving her with the harsh reality of Mark's downfall. I watched from a distance as she tried to salvage what she could, her pride shattered, her dreams of grandeur in ruins. But the real shock was yet to come. 2 weeks after the IRS raid, I was at home when I heard a knock at the door. It was Laura, her face streaked with tears, her clothes disheveled. She was a shadow of her former self, begging for help, for shelter, for anything. "Eric, please," she pleaded. "I have nowhere else to go." I stood there looking at her, the woman who had once sneered at me, now reduced to this. The house, once filled with her laughter, now echoed with her desperation. I felt a mix of pity and satisfaction, but mostly I was curious about what she would say next. Her voice trembled as she continued. "Mark's gone, Eric. He left me when the money dried up. I thought he was the one, but he was just like you said, all charm and no substance." I could see the pain in her eyes, the realization that she had been used just as she had used me. I wanted to feel vindicated, but all I felt was a hollow victory. "Laura, why should I help you after everything?" My voice was calm, but inside, a storm of emotions raged. She looked down, her voice barely above a whisper. "Because I know I was wrong. I was blinded by what I thought was love, but it was just a facade. I need a chance to make amends, to start over." The air was thick with the weight of our past. I remembered the nights she spent in Mark's arms, the laughter that now seemed so cruel. Yet here she was, broken, asking for my help. I took a deep breath, the scent of her familiar perfume mixing with the cold air. "You can stay here, but not as my guest. You'll earn your keep, and we'll see if you can truly change." Laura nodded, tears streaming down her face. "Thank you, Eric. I'll do whatever it takes." As she stepped inside, I couldn't help but wonder if this was the beginning of her redemption or just another chapter in our twisted story. Cliffhanger. What would I do with the woman who had once? As Laura moved into the house, her presence was like a ghost haunting the halls she once walked. With confidence, I watched her as she cleaned, her movements slow and deliberate, a stark contrast to the vibrant woman who had once filled this space with her laughter. Each room she entered seemed to shrink, the walls closing in with the weight of our shared history. She started in the kitchen, where she had once planned meals for Mark. Now she scrubbed the counters with a fervor that spoke of her desperation to prove herself. I leaned against the doorway, my arms crossed, observing her. "You used to dream of cooking gourmet meals here," I said, my voice devoid of any warmth. Laura paused, her hands still on the sponge, and looked at me with eyes that held a storm of regret. "I know, Eric," she whispered, her voice cracking. "I was foolish, blinded by what I thought was love." I nodded, not out of agreement, but acknowledgement of her words. "This isn't about love anymore, Laura. It's about consequences. You chose your path, and now you're walking it back." She resumed her cleaning, the sound of water splashing in the sink filling the silence between us. I could see the toll it was, taking on her, the physical labor, the emotional strain. Yet there was something about watching her, not with malice, but with a sense of closure. It was as if each scrub of the floor, each wipe of the counter, was erasing the memories of her betrayal, piece by piece. Days turned into weeks, and Laura's routine became a part of the house's rhythm. She worked tirelessly, her once manicured hands now rough from the labor. I found myself softening, not towards her, but towards the idea of forgiveness, not for her sake, but for mine. The anger that had fueled my actions was beginning to wane, replaced by a hollow emptiness that needed filling with something other than revenge. One evening, after she had finished her chores, Laura approached me as I sat in the living room, a glass of whiskey in hand. "Eric, can we talk?" she asked, her voice tentative. I looked up at her, the glass of whiskey in my hand feeling like an extension of my own resolve. "What is it, Laura?" I asked, my tone neutral, betraying none of the turmoil within. She sat down across from me, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. "I've been thinking a lot about what I've done, about us, about everything," she began, her voice steady, but laced with an undercurrent of sorrow. "I know I can't undo the past, but I want to make things right. I want to earn back some semblance of respect, not just from you, but from myself." I took a sip of my drink, the burn of the alcohol a sharp contrast to the cold reality of our conversation. "Respect is earned, Laura, and trust, once broken, is hard to mend." She nodded, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. "I understand. And I'm not asking for your forgiveness, not yet, but I want you to know that I'm here, not just to clean your house, but to try and clean up the mess I've made of my life." The room was quiet, save for the ticking of the clock on the mantelpiece, each second stretching out like a reminder of the time we had lost. "Laura, you've seen what happens when you choose the wrong path," I said, my voice softening slightly. "But what makes you think you can change?" Her gaze met mine, and for a moment, I saw the woman I had fallen in love with, not the one who had betrayed me. "Because I have to, Eric. For me. I've hit rock bottom, and the only way is up. I'm not the same person I was when I left you. I've learned painfully about the consequences of my actions." I set my glass down, the clink of the ice against the crystal sounding like a gavel in a courtroom. "All right, Laura, you can stay, but remember this isn't charity. You'll work and you'll reflect. Maybe, just maybe, we can find some peace in this." Months passed, and Laura worked diligently, perhaps hoping to regain some of what she don't forget. To subscribe, like, and comment if you enjoyed this story. This will help us create more engaging stories for you.